Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Justin Stanton from BIMplus, the website from the Chartered Institute of Building, focused on information management and digital construction. And on my left or your right, depending how you're looking at, is
I'm Chris Lees, so Chief Executive at DataClan, although I wear quite a few hats, Government Advisor on Building Safety, Technical Director at OSCRE, and of course part of the Information Management Initiative Task Group, perhaps most importantly for today.
indeed. Okay, so I'll kick off, Chris, if that's okay. I've listened to a lot of what's been talked about so far, presented so far this morning, and I suppose the immediate question is, well, will it deliver? There've been so many initiatives in just the 4 years that I've been covering BIM, and I've heard a lot of people, both those involved in developing the initiatives and those on the receiving end, those having to practice what's being preached, complain that the initiatives haven't worked, or the original intent has been warped, or the message has become overcomplicated over time. Standards are too complex, all that stuff. So will the IMI deliver? How will it avoid, I won't say mistakes, the missteps of the past?
Well, I mean, if I just say yes and give everybody 28 minutes back, will that do? No, that's a big question, right? It's the $1 million question, as they'd say. So I suppose firstly, the thing to say is that we, when I was invited by Anne to get involved in this over a year ago, I was hearing those same messages that you just relayed, Justin, and it's I was worried, right? I mean, Anne and I have had a lot of conversations over the last few years about this complexity. So one of the things that we did in the task group is that we really tackled that complexity question head on. So firstly, I absolutely would agree that the existing guidance is overwhelming. It would be, people are smart enough to get that, right? We don't need to try and pretend it isn't. So we've got to do something about that. I mean, somebody was telling me just this morning about the fact that there's now guidance on the guidance. Now, if that's not a red flag, what is? So the question, though, is why is it so complicated? Organizations and individuals have low data management skills, I would say, and low data management maturity. And that means anything that's about data management or information management, of course, is going to seem complex. And I think we need to accept that. Again, let's not pretend that we're all good at this. We are not all good at this. That is clearly not the case. I coach athletics and endurance running. And, I wouldn't have a newcomer come along and I wouldn't say to them, go run this marathon. They'd almost certainly fail. They would get injured. They would resent me for sure. And they would probably have very little respect for me if I asked them to do that. So, in that context, we have nonetheless clients and government and regulators and industry bodies telling us that we have to do all of these things that we're just not trained for. So, everyone, all of us, we need to invest time in practicing and getting better. Training. We need coaches and we need mentors to help us, to guide us as we improve. And we need the kind of star performers to show us what world class looks like. Like Tamira Tola in the Paris Olympics, winning the Ethiopian who won the marathon there. I mean, amazing performance. So there's definitely that skill issue, but there's also a silo problem, right? We have, and I was listening with massive interest to the last group talking and sharing their experiences, particularly Trevor and Hannah from, they're at the coalface of this stuff. And they also described the fact that we work kind of very deeply in these silos, and it's really difficult for us to think broadly because it's complex. But that means our decision making is, we're cognitively selecting information that's very close to us. We don't have a broad view. And so inevitably we end up acting and behaving in silos. And that makes it complicated too, because it means we're not really valuing the data we have that isn't for us. The data that's for somebody later in the process is not so important to us, perhaps, so we don't really value it, and therefore it's not as good. We don't curate it and care for it. Down the line, it becomes a problem, of course. So the IMI's taken these head on. Firstly, from a skills perspective, it's simplified the ask. So it's made it much more specific for individuals rather than just giving this blanket generic guidance. And it's identified specific groups of stakeholders. So, for example, supporters who predominantly produce information. So think about manufacturers or researchers, publishers. And then there's gatekeepers who predominantly consume the information. So then you think about insurers, regulators, people like that. And then the parties who actually do the management and maintenance and use of the information. So the clients, the designers, the engineers, the consultants, all of these parties. And we've also looked at this from the perspective of what's the roadmap and the journey, and what does maturity look like? If I'm asserting that we all have fairly low levels of data management maturity, both individually and organizationally, then okay, let's put that on a map and let's look at where we go from there. How do we get better? And also from a silo perspective, you may have heard Bowler and Anne in their discussion this morning talking about that lovely life cycle diagram that Bowler and John Roberts produced. Fantastic piece of work. And that really helps people see where they fit in and start to really understand the fact that there is an entire world outside their silo, outside their silo, but it's not so complicated they can't understand it, right? They need to see the fit and join these bits up. So I think there's a lot of work being done there to try and make it, to try and address some of those things that you called out there, Justin, that were barriers in the past for sure.
I was pleased to hear. I think it came up in several of the presentations and conversations so far. The mention of insurers, because clients and insurers, that really is an incredible drive.
Absolutely, and my own background. So I've been kind of co-opted. Co-opted. I'm not sure whether that's the right word. I think I've been dragged kicking and screaming into this whole delivery phase, the whole construction side of this real estate and built environment world. My background is really on the investment side and the operational side. And yeah, I mean, insurers, absolutely. But, you look at the landlords, and beyond the landlords, you've got the investors and the fund managers and that entire community of the money, if you like, behind a lot of the schemes. Obviously, not all of the schemes, there's government infrastructure, there's lots of other kinds of built environment. But there's a huge world of stakeholders out there that, insurers, yes, it's great to be talking about them, but all of these other pieces as well that I think have been not overlooked. That's not fair. Everybody's known they're there. But I think for the first time in the IMI, we're actually starting to give them a place, give them a voice, give them actually a position and a stake in this discussion, which for whatever reason, and I honestly don't know why in the past they haven't, but they haven't had that voice in the past, I don't think, in this conversation.
Yeah, I recall, because I looked it up earlier, CDBB published the sort of 25 personas in a top trumps style for digital roles and tasks. But
Justin, are you allowed to say top trump today? It's
a bit close, isn't it? Yeah, but inappropriate use of language this week. Probably better me than him, maybe less impact. But so again, recognizing the IMI recognizes all these different stakeholders, all these different personas, and the idea that no one needs to know everything. You need to know that which applies to your role, to your responsibility. So, but going back to the complexity, by 2030, as one of the target dates listed so far, will we have everyone talking the same language, or at least everyone in the built and managed environment understanding how information applies to their roles?
Gosh, that's a big question. 2030 is, I mean, it's kind of a long way away and also just around the corner. I mean, this is the built environment sector, right? I mean, we are not well known for moving quickly. So can we all speak the same language by 2030? I hope so. But whatever, I suppose an ambition before then is for at least for us all to understand what languages we're supposed to be learning. And we're not even there today, right? So yes, hopefully by 2030 we'll be fluent. That would of course be the goal. And certainly within the information management initiative, of which we've only just completed phase one, there is certainly 5 more years of work to do on this. We will be doing absolutely everything we can to make sure that it is accessible, it is targeted, so that you only have to, learn about the bits that are relevant to you, and that, it's certainly my hope that everybody will become fluent. But it's certainly that's not going to be an easy journey.
No.
I look at today, the IMI now today states very clearly that the how part, and we do need to talk about, part of why it's going to work is the approach that is now organizationally led. We should come back to that in a moment, perhaps. But once you somehow made the decision to do all of this stuff, whatever that is, then what you do is very much predicated by the UK BIM framework today, because that's the only framework there is really in the real world that deals with all of the things you need to get right. But we also know that that in itself needs to grow and evolve. It's been a fantastic piece of work and has served us well to date, but it too is in need of review and revision and refinement if it's really going to get us to this 2030 that we all want.
Yeah, yeah. And acknowledging the amount of work still, for nima to do. So there was Anne's statement about funding. So this might be a difficult question, but I think it's a question that needs to be asked and at some point needs to be addressed. But will we see a level of transparency around what level of funding is required to achieve key goals? Perhaps show my age here, Blue Peter style thermometer, or being more modern, a Kickstarter style menu to focus stakeholders' minds. If we have X amount, we can do this. If we have X plus 50%, we can do this.
Yeah, I think that work is very much at the top of the list now. So obviously all of the focus up until today has been on getting to today. The next piece of work is to look at that very carefully, to look at what those next steps are and to understand what it's going to take to get there. And of course, as you will also know, these things are bi-directional, right? There's part of this is the resources needed to deliver these things. But also, with these resources, these are the things that can be delivered. So it is going to depend on people stepping up. I was chatting with some of the social housing providers over the last few weeks, and for those who are really leading the charge here, so the likes of Trevor and Hannah that we had on the last panel, the thing that I'm hearing over and over again is that we can do this better. We can do it. There's no barrier to us doing this better. We just need to do it. And part of that, I think, is about these organizations getting behind initiatives like this. And that requires resources. What I would say, though, is that whatever it might take to deliver the information management initiative over the next 5 years, it's the cheapest way to get to the good outcome that we want in 2030. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is that every organization still has to invest in getting better at information, because who's going to get worse at data management in this world, right? That's a ridiculous strategy. So everybody's going to be investing in data management. So, what would you rather do? Invest in doing it all yourself again in your own little kind of world, not benefiting from everybody else's expertise? Or would you rather put some of that resource into pooled efforts where actually the Avengers assembled kind of mentality here, get the right people together in the room and come up with something that really is well thought through and robust and solid, but also practical. So if you look at what Anne's been proposing in her conversation today and what's in the IMI information, it is very much about that balance between getting the experts and people who really know how this could be done together, but also putting that in a context where there's the right kind of steering group to make sure that those experts are well focused. This is not an ivory tower exercise.
Yeah.
One of the things that drives me nuts about this is that I keep getting asked, how much do people need to invest to, implement ISO 19650 or implement the UK BIM framework? And I'm like, well, I can price that out for you for sure, but it's the wrong question. Yeah. The question is, how much will I save by doing it? What will become possible? I mean, we heard, earlier today, a number of speakers have talked about the kinds of benefits that are realizable. I mean, we need, and yeah, I think it was Trevor saying that they're commissioning a university to do a really robust, academically rigorous study of how much difference having information management, if you like, makes to tenant satisfaction. And tenant satisfaction is one of the key measures for social housing right now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the question you should be asking, not how much does it cost to be better at information management. It's like, if I invest that in information management, is it really going to double, my customer satisfaction? Because am I really going to do first time fixes every time?
Yeah. Yeah. Which takes us, as ever, back to start with the end in mind. And the
Yes.
end in mind isn't that you need a new building. You need a new building because you need to do something else. You need to provide a service or a shelter or whatever it is to people.
Do you know that? I think that's a really interesting point. I'm writing an article for the Corporate Real Estate Journal at the moment, and that speaks to um, decision making in real estate. And I've used, perhaps obviously, Grenfell as one of the examples in the paper. But the thing about Grenfell is that, that wasn't the first tragic fire that we had.
Mm.
And I look back to 1973 and the Summerland disaster on the Isle of Man, where a leisure centre essentially burnt down because of flammable cladding, amongst other things. Very much the same kind of context. And it would be easy to ask the question, we just don't seem to have learned in that process. But what we do need to be clear about in all of this, I think, is that when we're talking about assets in the built environment, it's very easy to get distracted by them being symbols in some kind, instead of really understanding the outcome. And the outcomes, almost entirely still today, the outcomes are about human beings and people. I mean, yes, Google need a data center that's in a ship in the ocean to cool it. I mean, that's not a people-centered outcome. I get that. But, when we're talking about homes and offices and railway stations and airports and all of this built environment around us, the outcomes are about people. And if we get too distracted by thinking of them as symbols, and I call out Grenfell because, there were 4 objectives that were involved in the refurbishment of Grenfell. That one of the outcomes of which was the dreadful cladding decisions that were made. But 3 of those outcomes were completely aligned with what the UK government defines as being a decent home. The decent home standard was behind. I'm not sure whether it was the driver, but certainly 3 of the objectives of the refurbishment spoke to decent homes characteristics. But one of them wasn't. One of them was an aesthetic. And in fact, if you look at some of the key design decisions made by the architects, particularly in the, I forget what you call it, but the very top, the decorative cladding put around the very top of the building, these were purely aesthetic decisions. They were treating the built environment as symbolic in some way of something. And there's a real danger in that. I think it skews our thinking.
Yeah. As I say, one of the things that came out for me from the Grenfell inquiry final report was that emphasis on the built environment. It is for people. We only do it for people, really. And even the submerged data center is a technical solution to, quote unquote, people's need. But talking about different needs then, and not being overly facetious with stating this, if it's not in the contract, it doesn't matter. So since the IMI was first mentioned, a year or so ago, whatever it was, there's always been talk and a greater focus on the role of clients and their recognition of the importance of information, how they should request it, how they should use it. Will the IMI deliver the information engaged clients that the industry needs?
Well, I hope so. I think the bottom line is, and I mentioned this a moment ago, many clients absolutely have to do better. They are, in very many ways, both legally and morally, the buck stops with them oftentimes. And as I was mentioning, the leaders who have actually tried to do better have found that they can do better. This is not like it's an unachievable objective, so it's all possible. There's also a direction of travel involved here. They're being pushed by legislation like the Building Safety Act, really trying to prevent them being laggards too much, at least. But as I was saying a moment ago, for me, that's really missing the point. The real value in information management isn't the imperative of some new law or statute. It's something you have to do just to remain competitive. you're going to, if you follow the information management initiative as a client, you are going to save money, you're going to deliver projects faster, you're going to have better outcomes, and probably better symbols if you have to care about that, but definitely better outcomes. And, we've heard about just some of the examples of the kind of human and financial cost of not getting it right. So it's not like we need to imagine this or believe anybody. I mean, the evidence is all around us of how bad it is. I mean, I don't solely work in social housing, but I do a lot of work in social housing. And if you look at their complaints, if you go to the housing regulator and look at the judgments made against housing providers when a complaint, when they're doing a review, or go to the ombudsman and look at the ombudsman's recommendations or rulings after a complaint's been escalated to them, you can see how many of those are really just about poor information management. Cases where you have 25 operatives sent out to the same leak and it still isn't fixed. Sending operatives out to locations where they can't actually find the thing they're supposed to be fixing. I mean, these are for the most part really simple information management problems to solve, and yet a lot of clients have not solved them. Not just in social housing. This is fairly pervasive, I think. So I think, though, it is a question of when, not if at this point, because organizations that don't, clients that don't become information engaged are not going to be competitive in whatever is defined as their market. I mean, social housing has a market. It's not the same as an office developer's market, but they all have effectively customers that they serve. So I think really the way to look at this is being information engaged as a client. If you're not going to do that, it's just like saying we don't care about data, and no business is going to say that today, right? It doesn't matter where you operate. That, as I said earlier, it's a ridiculous statement to make. So the sector's going to demand this. What the Information Management Initiative will do is just make it a lot easier to achieve.
Okay. Other things we need to achieve. We can't decarbonise the built and managed environment without information. Will the IMI help us meet those green targets?
That's a great question, and also it's a terrible question, and I'm not quite sure which way I want to take it. So let me start with it being a great question. So all of this information, I mean, you're right, you can't decarbonize without information, but this information, it tends to be seen in these silos through narrow lenses. So, for example, as I mentioned at the start, I've advised the government on the Building Safety Act and been involved in reviewing guidance, and then working with particularly social housing providers in how they can implement the Building Safety Act requirements and also interpret the guidance in some meaningful way. Now, in doing that work, I have seen organizations who have had a project to implement information management for the golden thread, because in Building Safety Act terms, we have a name for the information management piece. It's called the golden thread, right? It's like, it's got a name. And when things have a name, they somehow have this prominence. But for me to have a project to implement information management for the golden thread, it's almost like it's something separate, but it's not separate. If you look at the information that you need for the golden thread about size and materials and composition and structure and condition and specification that all informs safety, well, the vast majority of that also informs sustainability needs. It's not a different set of data. So I think, I hesitate to say, is it going to help with green targets? I mean, the answer is self-evidently yes, but don't stop there. It's safety, it's sustainability, it's customer satisfaction and complaints, it's repairs. I mean, in social housing repairs, if you get a fix right first time, your customer satisfaction jumps from 40%-ish to 80%. I mean, it's mind-blowing the difference that makes. You've got planned maintenance programs. You go and install 10,000 kitchens, right? Your supplier is probably going to be adding 30 to 40% contingency on the amount of worktop they need.
Mm.
Why? Because they don't have the right information. If they knew about the kitchens, they wouldn't need any contingency really, or just a small amount of contingency. 30 to 40%
Yeah.
is typical in the market. So absolutely crazy. And, we've got all of this information allows us to be just much more surgical in the way that we plan any work, whether it's responsive repairs, whether it's planned programs. So yeah, the information management initiative, good information management, it definitely helps with meeting green targets, undoubtedly. But we mustn't make green targets just another silo of activity. Would be my hesitation there. Please don't, if there's any ESG managers listening here, please don't go off and make a business case to do your ESG information management project. No, what we're going to think about, as the information management initiative absolutely describes, is you've got to see this as an organization-wide activity. The mandate needs to come from the top, and we've done a lot of work providing the right kind of tools and language to help executives make the decisions necessary to do organization-wide work, or for senior leaders to put together business cases to take to those executives to make the decisions. But please see this as an organization-wide mandate, an organization-wide approach that needs to be taken.
Will the initiative's progress be, quote unquote, publicly benchmarked? Not looking to penalise or anyone to lose their job per se, but will there be a level of accountability? And is there any kind of vision of what success will look like in terms of hard numbers? The number of supporters, the number of sponsors, the number of if you've got all the institutions, you've got REBA, RICS, CIOB, etc. If they're all signed up and they've mandated it down through all their members, that gives you X number of thousand. So, is there a vision of what success looks like?
Well, there may be that. I have to say that's probably above my pay grade in terms of the overall program. I'm sure that's very much in Anne's mind, those kinds of thoughts about what success looks like in terms of supporters and sponsors. For me, though, I think it's much more measuring success for something like this is always going to be a very difficult thing. But I think we're going to see it piece by piece, and the important part of this is really being able to talk about and demonstrate what is achieved when organizations do this. And that's one of the reasons I love the IMI approach of making this an organization-centric mandate now, not an industry-centric mandate, because then those organizations can tell us what it was like. And in fact, a key part of organizations that do sign up to the initiative and mandate this within their organization, part of what they're mandating, one of the 5 fundamental rules that we're asking them to mandate, is this simple principle that they should share their progress and also their experience and help others and help converge other organizations on the same journey and help us improve the framework. I mentioned, we know the framework is not going to be perfect. There's a lot of refinement needed. And we want the people who are, and I say the people, really people in the kind of legal sense of including the organizations, the bodies corporate, we want them to be signing up to this and telling us what works and what doesn't work and helping us make it better. Circling back to that governance model we have to make sure they have a voice so they really can influence where the focus is and where the work is done. But we are absolutely committed to making this as accessible as possible, to make it very highly relevant to each stakeholder that is trying to adopt and implement, and to help people, reap the amazing benefits of good information management. And let's be frank, stay out of jail these days as well. There's both sides here.
Yeah. I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left, and I've just been throwing questions at you. But I was intrigued in the previous session by one of the final points between, I think it was Hannah and Trevor, and that idea of imagine how great it would be if someone working for Orbit left Orbit and went to work for Home Group, and the systems were the same, the process was the same. There wasn't a Lord knows how long period of getting up to speed because they're working to the same processes. And I thought that was a really, again, I think someone mentioned hope earlier. I can't remember who and how important hope is. It's not a strategy, but we must have it. And I thought that's just an idea to play with, to toy with.
It really is. And you look at in today's world, you can't move from the housing management department to the asset management department and have the same processes and data, never mind another company. So we have a long way to go. But I moved out of investment banking sector into real estate 25 years ago. And lots of people asked me, why did you do that? Investment banking is where all of the investment and the money is for great technology. You're going to be doing much more interesting things there. And I was like, no, here's the thing. All of the opportunity is in real estate because it's been a bit behind. Now, that was 25 years ago. A lot's changed now, but I think we're in a really exciting moment, really supported by the Information Management Initiative, to see real transformational change in a number of elements of the built environment. I look forward to the next 5 years for sure.
Excellent. Chris, thank you. And I think that's probably time for us to hand back to Fiona.
Thank you, Justin.
Pleasure. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Fiona.